In this video, I'd like to talk to you about something called prefabs. Prefabs in Unity are incredibly powerful and they're used all the time. In the majority of objects, I would estimate in a Unity project are typically built from prefabs or some combination of prefabs. So let me show you what a prefab is. A prefab is a way to specify a game object or a group of game objects as something that you want to be able to reuse over and over again, right? The way that you build a prefab or create a prefab is you take a game object from your scene. So in this example, I have a dungeon game object, which is supposed to track my entire dungeon. And I've built out room one, which just looks like this. It's pretty simple. It's got a floor and a couple walls and a rear wall. Something like this. A left wall, a right wall, and a rear wall. I'm going to take this room one and I'm going to turn it into a prefab. And I do that by grabbing this game object and dragging it down here into my assets directory or into my assets folder in my project view. Within my project view, this is showing me all of the assets that I have that I can reuse in my Unity game or in my scenes. So I've got this room one prefab that I just created. Notice how the text for this room one up here has changed to blue. That means it's part of a prefab. Notice how the icon here is now using the prefab icon, which is this blue icon. And then I can also see that room one is down here. There's a few other options that I get up here as well. This drop down saying override, as well as this open select button. And then if I click on this room one, I also get this open prefab button, right? As well as some information about it. So let's go over what all this means. The first thing I'm going to do is, because I'm a good Unity developer, is I'm going to keep my assets organized. So I'm going to right click down here and hit create folder. And I'm going to create a new folder called prefabs. And I'm going to put this asset inside that prefabs folder. General rule of thumb is you should never have any assets that are in your base assets directory, and you always want to sort them into various folders. So here's my room one prefab, which is there's a copy of it here in my scene. So the way this works is this room one here in my scene is just a copy of this asset. So I can go ahead and delete this thing, and that's fine. I still have my room one here. The neat thing about this is I can take my room one and I can drag it into my scene, right? So there's one. There's another one. There's another one, right? So now I have 3 room ones here in my scene. I'm just creating copies of this thing just by literally dragging it into my scene, right? So a neat thing about this is I can go and take these various copies of this prefab and I can move them and position them, place them where I want, right? However I want. And if I expand these, I can still see that they've all got the floor, left wall, right wall, rear wall. Now, say that I want to add a 4th wall to all of these rooms, right? I can actually do that in 2 ways because it's a prefab. If I go to this room 1 down here and I hit open prefab, now I'm in the prefab editor, right? So I'm just viewing this object as the same one thing. Let's duplicate this wall and let's move it over here. So now my room is sort of complete with 4 walls. I'm going to save this. I'll call this my front wall. I'm going to back out. Notice how each one of the rooms that I have in my scene now has that other wall, right? So it takes any of the changes from the prefab and applies it to every single copy of that prefab that's being used in the scene. Cool. Let's look at what else we can do. Now, with each of these rooms that are in my scene, I can customize them all individually as well. So I could take this wall and move it in or squish it or do whatever I need to do. And this one copy of the prefab is different than the other copies here. Now I can see the differences between this prefab or this instance of the prefab and the master prefab, the one that's down here, the base one. By selecting the prefab, I can click on this drop down that says overrides. In this, it will tell me that my front wall transform information is different. And this actually gives me 2 options in here. I can revert it back to what it was, like that. So now it's gone back to the settings of the original prefab. The other option that I have in there is I can click this and I can hit apply to all. Watch what happens to my other 2 rooms when I hit apply all. I've modified the actual prefab itself down here in the assets, down here in my assets directory, in my project view or my project window. And because I modified the default prefab, it actually updated all instances of that prefab, right? So I can move this wall. I could take this individual wall. I can move it back like this. And I could say, I want to apply this to, I want to take my room, I want to apply it to all instances of this prefab. And now all my walls are back, right? This is a really great way to, whenever you have those objects that are sort of like being reused within all your scenes, right? If you were building a game similar to Mario, I would imagine that all of your floor pieces, your coins, your power-up boxes, your enemies, all of these things would be prefabs. And you'd be modifying the prefabs. And that way, when you're using these things in your scenes, you can actually just edit them in one place and have all of your scenes updated across the board with all the new information about these objects. Prefabs are incredibly powerful, and you should really embrace them for anything that you're reusing more than once within your scenes or across multiple scenes.